Excellent. Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everyone to this workshop of the Science and Resilience Committee, a quarter century of change in Otago. This is a public workshop. Turn on that. This is a public workshop. It's not, I understand, being live streamed, but the recording will be posted as soon as humanly possible. We have a number of people in the room. At the moment, we don't appear to have anyone online. Right? We will carry on. The slides for the workshop are in the Resource Centre under Council Resources 2024-25. You can find them there. And we're very pleased that we will be handing over to Ben Mackey and Jason Alexberger, who will be taking us through this very interesting work. We've got an hour for this. So there's a presentation and there will be plenty of chances for questions and discussion. So Ben and Jason, we'll hand over to you to introduce what we're all about.
Good afternoon and thanks very much for having us. This is a bit of an idea we've been cooking around. The hope today is to really sort of get your appetite and enthusiasm and opinion on things. Jason will be doing most of the run through of the slides, but hopefully it's reasonably interactive. And so I'll pass it over to Jason.
You might do. Yeah, that's right.
Excitement is building.
It's partially motivated by some of the work we did for the land water plan, some tools and resources we developed for that, how to retool, reuse those. So.
Alrighty, well, someone more skilled than me works away. So there we go. Workshop will be on a quarter century of change in Otago. And what we're looking for today is a bit of feedback on direction and level of comfort with some of the content in this presentation. Effectively, what we're looking to do is leverage a lot of our existing work programs that we've started to build within the science team and some of the newer disciplines that we've got across different domains to try and integrate across domains to give a more complete picture about what's happened to Otago's environment over the last 25 years, give or take. So context, Council's report monitor state of the environment under the RMA, largely to detect degradation and assess the effectiveness of its plans for anything related to its functions effectively. So water quality, quantity, biodiversity, soil health, air quality, coast and estuaries, and land as it relates to those things. More broadly, even if you kind of move out of RMA speak, given some of the changes that are coming through, if you want to manage resource, you need to know where you are, where you're going, and how you might get there. So monitoring state is always an important part of any sort of environmental management. We do a lot of this, and we're doing increasingly more in different domains. And so there's a non-comprehensive set of report titles that have come probably through the council table over the last handful of years across the different domains. But what you'll notice is that they come individually by domain. So there's ones on biodiversity or water quality. They aren't integrated to provide a complete and full picture. That was picked up in the Take Water Why report. So Take Water Why highlighted we've got an increased environmental capacity, and that's been one of Otago Regional Council's strengths recently, but we haven't yet produced that integrated state of environment report to give a whole environment picture. So we kind of have two options for how we might go about doing that. Option one is to aggregate existing knowledge into a whole environment report. So what that would be is effectively collate all of those different SOE reports into one document. Some benefits there, which is it would give us a quick, easy way of doing it. We just use the existing knowledge. does provide a single point of reference for the community to look at all of those things in one place. We can improve our communication style, make that a bit more accessible than what you get in those more technical work packages, which are a bit hard to understand. But it is effectively repackaging existing knowledge. And so we aren't trying to link the domains or cross domain. We're just trying to basically reconvey what's in those existing reports. And what that means is there's ultimately limited opportunity to try and link across, because you might need to analyze things slightly different to link across domains. And in a nutshell, that means that statements like this are still going to be there. And so these are copied and pasted. The first two are out of water quality reports, the SOE report, and then the baseline state report, whereas the bottom one is out of the air state environment report. But statements like there's a lack of land information on land use change or land management practice, which means that we can't interpret trends across Otago, whether they're improving or degrading. We can't try and get at that causation in any way. Next two are about climate. And so while we might pick up a trend, if it's over a shorter time cycle, we can't tell you why it's happening, because it could just be climatic factors and you're on that part of the climate swing that means that things are improving. And that's really frustrating for everyone at these tables. It's really frustrating for everyone in the science team, and it's really frustrating for communities when reports have lines like this in them.
You probably see that in some of the water quality trend reports out. Trends are going up and down at different time frames, depending on the length of record. So the thinking here is to really try and give a bit of a longer term perspective to get around some of that.
So the other option is that instead of just amalgamating the reports that we have, is we take a bit of time and try and use some of the under-analyzed or new analyses to try and get at some of these things more comprehensively, and try and retroactively describe what's happened across Otago for all of those domains in an interlinked way over the last 25 years. So that would be land, water, air, coast, and biodiversity. And that would answer questions like those listed here, such as what's happened to Otago's environment over the last 25 years, what sort of drivers might be driving those changes, what are the relative role of those things, so things like how might land use change be driving water quality, or how might winter temperatures be driving changes in air quality. Are there any examples of environmental improvement where our actions, the community group's actions, different things like that might have led to improvement? And then are there any issues that are kind of building or looming over that 25 years that we might want to cater monitoring towards in the future? There's quite a few benefits and a couple of drawbacks to that sort of approach. So we can provide a publicly digestible assessment of long-term change. They give you a better picture of causation wherever possible, and it'll build a really robust base for any sort of RM response. So basically having that comprehensive knowledge across domain puts us in a really good position that no matter what RM reform looks like, we should then have a knowledge base that can underpin response. It enables integrated interpretation. So instead of saying the estuary is going down, but we aren't sure why, we can look at how trends in water quality might be affecting estuary load, for instance, and where those trends in water quality might be arising from on land. How is increasing air temp affecting water quality, or sorry, air quality, but also irrigation demand and things like low flows. It does take a little bit more resource to do that sort of thing, because we'll have to reanalyze some of the existing data we have and get access to data sets that exist, such as the Ag Production Survey from Stats NZ, to use some of those existing data sets that we haven't analyzed in the past. Retroactively, we can only go so far. So as you keep going back, some of the things that will underpin this, like satellite imagery, become less and less available and sort of start to peter out somewhere around 2000 to 1990. So we can get a reasonably clear picture as we go back in time, but it will become more fuzzy as you try and go further and further back. And some of the patterns that we find could be confronting. So there has been quite a bit of change in Otago over 25 years. And while it feels like 2000 was very recent, it wasn't necessarily as recently as it feels sometimes. How would this program relate to other plan processes? So obviously we've done quite a bit of work on science to inform a land and water plan, science to inform an air plan. This will be multi-domain, not just one domain. So not just water, we're not just air. So we're trying to link across domains. Planning processes quantify what's happened to an extent, but they're generally focused at where are we going and how might we get there? So how might we respond? So they're often future focused as opposed to providing this long-term historic picture, depending on how you define long-term. It will provide a relatable context. So when you think about perhaps water quality, how far might on-farm mitigations get us back, you can phrase that as similar to 2008 or similar to 2000, as opposed to saying 12%, which is a bit hard to grasp. And then the program will utilize tools developed for other programs and SOE data in a new way. So a lot of the modeling that we developed for land and water planning can be repurposed to hindcast how things might have been, which just leverages that work even further than it has been done.
Yeah, just to add to that, some of the coding, the geospatial coding capability to be developed through the land water plan processes, yeah, it's pretty powerful. And so this seems like quite a bit of work, but feeding it through that sort of framework makes it feel fairly efficient.
You need we will have spots for questions, but
No, wait until the end, it's fine.
Yeah.
So thinking a bit about what's changed over the last 25 years, certainly Otago's experienced extensive land use change, but alongside that land use change, you've had a lot of change in what I would call land management practice. So on-farm practice has also changed significantly. There's been intensification, but there's also been improved management aimed at reducing nutrient loss on farm. There's been improvement in stock genetics and productivity, where perhaps you can get more productive output at lower loss rates for nutrients or lower water use. Irrigated area, it's expanded, but irrigation type has changed and efficiency has improved. So certainly you see a trade-off there. New invasive species, climate's not stationary. So the graph on the right there is air temperature and the anomaly from the norm. So you can see that's ever increasing at the moment. Urban expansion, certainly in the Upper Lakes and around Dunedin. I think we've all seen that expand a bit. And then undoubtedly there's many other ways Otago has changed over the last 25 years, including population growth and all of those sorts of things. So the next few slides that I'm going to step through are just images off Google Earth. So if you're really curious, you can go open Google Earth yourself. It's free, and flick through different time steps. I'm going to show predominantly 2000 and 2025, just because that's that 25-year window, but they do have incremental photos on there. The green circles are areas that you'll particularly be able to see change, and then I've put some insets for urban areas with the red square there. One thing I do want to note and be very clear about here is they aren't necessarily always taken in the same condition, because sadly we don't control the satellite. So some of these will be taken during dry periods, some during wet periods, and so on and so forth. So color isn't always indicative of irrigation or something like that, or intensity. So we just need to be a wee bit careful about if it's green, it's intensified. That's not necessarily the case here. It could just have rained. So first picture, Hawaii Flat, the Lindis area in Wanaka. What I'll point out is Wanaka near the Cardrona Flat is basically pasture. Don't see any pivot circles, pretty limited irrigation occurring. Fast forward to 2025, and you'll see quite a few circles pop up from spray irrigation, which could mean intensification, but also potentially means more efficient water use. You'll see Wanaka has now rapidly expanded out onto the Cardrona Flat area. And then the Hawaii Flat also has expansion irrigated area, as well as sort of an emerging urban environment up by the lake. Central Otago, similar sort of things here. So the top two, you'll be looking at sort of that irrigation change or irrigation practice change, and then it might be shifting to spray. Whereas the bottom one, you'll be looking at a forestry block that appears. And just off the bottom of that green circle, you can see McRae's and how much that may have expanded. So you'll see pivots and spray irrigation coming into the fold. A large forestry block comes into the shag catchment, and then McRae's has expanded. So I'll just rock and roll that a little bit. You can see the difference there.
Can you do that again?
Yeah, no problem. So that's 2025 just here.
Mm.
And then if I go back, that's 2000. And again, free tool online. So if you want to see, 2008 or something, anyone can go and have a look and kind of scroll back through time and scroll forward through time and watch how different areas of the region have changed. Some are easier to see, and some are harder to see. Moving down towards the Dunedin area, I've circled a few areas with forestry, and then as well Mosgiel, where you can see quite a bit of urban expansion. So the thing to watch for here is areas that don't have trees will gain trees predominantly. So again, you can see the forestry planting that's occurred and the growth of trees as well and the darkness of the color. So certainly quite a bit of change that has occurred in Otago over the last 25 years. I think that does stand out. But what exactly the impacts of that are is a bit tricky to understand because you've got improved irrigation. That means things like pea loss may have decreased when you shift from flood to spray. That's a good thing. You've got improved efficiency, you've got land use change, but you've got on-farm practice potentially improving. And so you've got multiple storylines that occur at different spatial scales across the region. And you've got forestry where it's gone in, it's been harvested, perhaps replanted. You've got urban environments that have expanded or in some cases been created from places that probably wouldn't have been considered overly urban. So what might a program that tries to look at this do? We've split it down by domain here. So for land, what you're aiming at doing is soil health and then creating a time series of land use maps, irrigated area maps, and then a sort of time series of farm practice change. And so what you're trying to do there is eventually create nutrient loss maps that incorporate both land use change, but also on-farm practice into how they would look at nutrient loss. Generally speaking, we just do that with land use change at the moment, which gives you quite a different picture than you might get if you build in that practice change component. For fresh water, including both ground and surface, you've got water quantity, where you can look at trends in flow, rainfall, and groundwater level, and how those might compare to changes in irrigated demand. Then you've got water quality, where we can analyze water quality trends in a different way that better accounts for climate, so that we can see trends over different time periods and try and strip out some of the climatic effects of those trends. Biodiversity, Scott spent quite a lot of time working through the regional threat statuses, and those include a trajectory component or a trend component, looking at whether species are going up or down. But then with ecosystems, we can look at changes in wetland extent and extent of indigenous vegetation over that 25-year period. Estuary and coast, we've actually not produced a state of environment report to date, so we would look to do so. And then with air and climate, you would have trends on emissions that you're more familiar with, such as particulate matter, but some of the what do you consider emerging contaminants or other contaminants like nitrogen dioxide and black carbon, which some of those we may have to use proxies for, like traffic. But we can use proxies to look at the risk of whether or not those contaminants have increased, as well as air temperature. So looking at climate, and you can kind of pick your favorite air temperature metric, whether that's winter temperatures or summer temperatures or mean annual temperature, looking at all the different ways that that could be realized. From there, which is kind of just the state thing, what we want to do is do these linking analyses where we look at land use and practice change to tell stories both of what's happening on farm. So within a land use, how has practice changed and improved nutrient loss, but also what's happening between that land use and practice change and water quality. We want to look at irrigated demand and how that might link to water quantity trends, how biodiversity trends might be related to land use change or risk from predators and things like that. And then how the changes in water quality might be linking into how changes in estuaries are occurring. We'll do some case studies. So looking at, examples of sort of an average sheep and beef farm and how practice has changed, catchment level change and what that might have done for water quality, particularly where we have catchment groups that have put actions in place. species interventions and improvement. So Pete talked about some of the stuff yesterday where you've had an intervention aimed at improving an outcome for an Indigenous species that's been, at least in the immediate term, successful. Same with ecosystems and estuaries, and then air quality as well, looking at how behaviors have changed and whether or not it's improved. We do have some examples. So these are kind of things that would feed into it and not necessarily full outputs. So what you're looking at here is a map of forestry in Otago and when it was harvested. That's from some work that MFE have done. So in purple, you've got forestry blocks harvested in 2008. And as you go more towards the green, you hit the mid 2015 period, and yellow is 2022. And so what you can see is some of the areas near Mahinarangi were harvested in 2008, whereas the ones down by Lake Waihola were harvested more recently in the teens and including a couple of years ago. One of the things that we can do with this is we can look at when forestry was planted. So this map has areas that were planted pre-1990 in red, which means that they're probably at an age where they're near harvest. And what you'll see is there's a fair bit of forestry in Otago, or particularly this area of Otago, that is near harvest. So that enables us to think about future work programs and whether or not there's something that we'd like to put in place monitoring wise with respect to that red area. Overseer, for those who aren't familiar, it's a farm model. And so what we can do is put in things like stocking rate, irrigation, soil types, and all sorts of different variables. And what we're aiming here is not necessarily to come up with what's the nutrient loss number, but we're aiming at what's the relative change given different practice and things like that. So we're not looking to use it in a regulatory context, but more just a change context. It is geared to enable you to do that. So you can look at things like what was your nutrient budget for 2015 versus 2016, or in this case, we'd be going 2000, 2005, 2010, and looking at how sort of an average farm has changed over time. We would break that down into different farm types in different areas. What you're looking at here is some of the modeling from the land and water plan, and I've kind of flipped it back to front to try and demonstrate the kind of change you might see. So on the left, you have the good management plus scenario, which was as much mitigation as you could really apply. And on the right, you have current. And then what you're looking at is sort of the risk of end loss under those different scenarios. So I've said, instead of mitigating, we'll act like the mitigations are a lower intensity time period. But so what you might see is that over different time periods, risk of nutrient loss either increases or decreases based on that on-farm practice change and land use change component. From that, what we can do is we compare to water quality trends. And so what you're looking at here are the dots are concentrations in river, whereas the lines are the trend with the climate removed. So if you get rid of that climate signal that we often struggle with in water quality. In a low changed environment, you might see a trend kind of like on the left, where it's just sort of reasonably flat, goes up and down on occasion for whatever reason, but it's largely flat. Whereas in those high risk change environments, you could see a trend on the right where you've got increasing nitrogen levels. Likewise, we might expect to see something similar to this, where for phosphorus, you've got a relative low change environment on the left, where it's kind of just tracking along. Whereas on the right, it was increasing, and then all of a sudden it starts decreasing. And that could be a signal from something like conversion of flood to spray irrigation, where you don't have phosphorus running over land into the waterway anymore. Switching to irrigated demand, this is an irrigation map out of the groundwater report for Hawaii Flat. So you've got mapped irrigated area in 2011 and then 2018. And what we can do is combine that with things like rainfall to get an estimate of demand and how that could have changed under those different irrigation scenarios. Threatened species. This is a figure from Stats NZ that I've pulled out, but we can do something similar for those in Otago. So what you've got on your y-axis here is the different groups of species, and then the percentage of species in those groups on your x. And then the different colors are the population trends that you could be seeing. So decreasing in red, stable in gray, and then the improving ones off on the right. This one's air temperature. We've highlighted some of the more local, though not always in our region, long-term sites that were analyzed here. So this is from NIWA and StatsNZ. What you'll see here is that the map is ubiquitously red. That's because these are largely long-term records, but what we'd be looking to do is not just look at average annual air temperature like what's presented here, but look at more winter air temperature, summer air temperature, and break it down a bit further. And then within Otago, you'll probably see a slightly more variable pattern in terms of whether or not it's increasing. Then you'll see a national scale about annual average. Ultimately, where we're trying to aim with this is a reader-friendly, non-technical report that spans all the different domains. MFE are some examples of how those sorts of things can look. So this is their Our Land and Our Water series that I've popped up some pages from here that try and present some of these change results in a more accessible way for people. Not saying that ours will look exactly like this, but aiming at something a bit more readable than your standard technical report. So that's kind of it for us. We've got a whole bunch of discussion points. Is any of it useful? Spatial scale in areas that we would focus at. Some of that will be limited by the sort of data sets we can get. There's an economics complement to all of this that I think is important. We don't necessarily have that capacity in our team, but it's something that the organization could have a look at. Any changes you think are key to describe, and then the urban gap that kind of exists within the science program.
Thank you very much indeed. No, that's great. Thank you, Jason and Ben, for taking us through that. Look, perhaps we'll just see if there's anyone needs any clarification of things, and then we can move on to your discussion points, which of course are not just questions, but actually comments. But anyone need to ask questions just to sort of get a better understanding of what we've been talking about so far? Okay.
Thank you. I was intrigued by the options, but I think I'm because the option 3 for me would have been to do this iteratively at a catchment scale, because that's the scale that I think people will be able to read it and understand it. So that sort of ticks off that box, but it was important for me because I didn't see it as an option. That's how I would have, and working on the Healthy Taieri project and seeing us doing the water, bringing all of that stuff together makes sense. It's really, really helpful at that scale. I don't necessarily want to get into water and go through a whole lot of chapters on North Otago, as great as it might be, Pomahaka, great place, but if I'm reading it iteratively to use it for my CCCB or anything like that, it can be at that catchment scale. So that's where I was coming from that. The overseer, is that still rated as, how would you agglomerate that information seriously? We've done a lot of work in that space because of greenhouse gas work, but I've never been a big fan of that, especially if you're not doing dairy.
Yeah, so we would be doing dairy in this case.
Yeah.
Also dairy.
Yeah.
It is what it is. You take the number as not necessarily right, but you take the relative change as best as you can get. We have been talking with beef and lamb about how to best do that and trying to work with them on getting data to help them help us with the model farm aspects of things like that. It's kind of the industry standard and probably the best we've got, to be honest. So
yeah, I suppose it just has another rider and a similar to the first riders you had. Yeah, I'm just really the temperature one's really interesting because I don't find the averages at all helpful, but the scale of temperature change, especially in places like where I come from or where Gary comes from, you know, how that is going up, and we don't get nearly as cold as we used to, and probably don't get any worse hot heat. So it's that because it's the winter temperatures which may bring in some of the highest risks to production, or the highest gains production. So those are I think we have to be quite detailed and quite a scale. It's just if it's going to be helpful to the reader, which I presume is what we want to do. But it's really interesting stuff. It's I've got a few other comments, but I just wanted to those were it is the options that triggered me to think about scale.
Thank you, and that's one of the discussion points is about scale there. Look, I see we've got Gary and Tim online too, so feel free to put your hands up. Look, if you've got questions or general points concerning these discussion points, I think go ahead. We've got Gretchen next, then Elliot.
I was just wondering if there are other reports or analysis around the country or ways of doing this that you're drawing upon as well? Like, is Otago creating this, or is it something that's happening other councils? Yeah, what inspiration are you drawing upon?
Both. So other councils generally have produced a whole of environment type report. It often has been more of that sort of amalgamation of existing report type concepts. We aren't alone in that we're trying to figure out how we do that better. There's a lot of other councils that have recognized 25 years as a pretty big milestone. So we're trying to do the same thing. Some of the unique things that we've got in Otago, obviously the biodiversity values we have, make a unique challenge as well as a unique case for how you present that. But then some of the modeling we've got lends itself really well to this hindcasting stuff with different change periods. And how we've done that historically in New Zealand is you chuck all the different variants like conversion to dairy, loss of sheep, forestry harvest and everything. And then it all comes out and it says, all right, well, increasing nitrogen tends to go up with increasing stocking rate, decreasing sheep, increasing dairy, and a whole bunch of things that actually make it really hard to tell what happened on farm and what might actually be driving that. And so what we're trying to do is constrain that variance into model farms, which mean that you can then try and interpret the results on farm as opposed to just having a bucket of covariates that might all lend to this. And so that's a pretty novel approach for New Zealand and something that hasn't really been done.
Is it, excuse me, internationally then? Just, yeah, I just think it must be a problem that a lot of people have been trying to solve. So it sounds amazing, so it's great, but yeah, just would not want us to, yeah, be reinventing if we don't need to as well. Yeah.
Yeah, internationally we'll be using like the water quality trend technique is something that USGS has been using since 2008. It isn't the New Zealand standard, but it does do a better job of controlling for climate and things like that. So we'll leverage those techniques that enable you to take out more variance from the data and get more of the questions that you're interested in.
Okay, thanks, Elliot.
Yeah, I guess just to run through the questions on the slide. Well, first of all, back on the drawbacks and benefits for option 2, I just sort of wanted to note that final one that I think said that could be confronting or something, and I think that's definitely an important challenge and thing to consider. But I certainly wouldn't consider that a drawback by any means. I think something like this would be very useful, and the economics complement would also be very interesting to have. I don't know how you would go about that though, and I was wondering if you were thinking you might look at creating sort of timelines for various trends, and then if you are doing that, potentially including, like if you've got like a timeline of an environmental measurement over time, adding a layer on top of that that's looking at, say, I don't know, 2004, this plan was introduced, and so if you see it, if you see the trends start to change after that, it might become clear what some of the more external discrete legislative drivers might be there, whether it's a plan or whether it's like national legislation or even some sort of I don't know, this business started a new incentive for their farmers or something like that. Could be interesting to have alongside just the general drivers of like, oh, these industries or this land management use or whatever.
I think once we have the data there, you can play in this sort of interrogate it in any which way. It's the work will be getting it there in a usable format, and then those sort of questions would be great to explore.
And on those last two ones, one of the changes that could be interesting, particularly for urban areas, I would say could be how permeable surfaces have changed in the urban environment over the past
Huge.
25 years. Yeah. That could be very interesting to look at.
Thanks. Yeah, it seems to me it makes very good sense to make use of information we have collected in the past and may not have thought of using this way. I'm just following up on Kate's suggestion of thinking about things at a catchment scale too, which also seems to make sense to me, because we're doing a whole lot more things on a catchment scale now. We've worked out that's a useful thing to do. It also might make it more manageable and would be a way of testing things out. Would there be disadvantages, though, in doing it on that catchment scale rather than having all the information from the region that might alert us to patterns? Would that be a significant disadvantage, do you think, or not?
Yes, there's both of those things. If you designed the data collection to do it, you wouldn't have an issue. But since we're trying to retroactively create some of these data sets, there's eventually going to be some sort of barrier at spatial scale where you get too fine. And you start to either drive the data to a point where it gives you red herrings that aren't appropriate or don't align with what did happen. And so there will be certain things that we struggle to report on at catchment scale, depending on the size of the catchment. And other things that we have no issue going to catchment scale. So it'll just be a matter of working through some of those results and understanding where those different limitations fall.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to say something which sounds quite harsh, and I don't mean it to sound harsh. I think this sounds like a really nice thing to do, but celebrating 25 years of science, absolutely wonderful. And this time, right now, where we are with rates and everything else, I think the messaging should be, how can we help our ratepayers the best, and how is that intuitive into their planning? And where the government is going, I think, with the RMA is into catchment and at farm scale talking to that catchment. And so that's really behind my thinking, is that we have to be adding value to make it easy for them. If we're not adding value, but just doing a nice stock take, I think we will catch ourselves out. I just think we should be really more nuanced about that and supporting the catchment groups to understand what those pressures, stresses and opportunities are. And being really clear that we're not making assumptions. I mean, one of the comments I've got is that you see that picture of hardware being really stark with irrigation, but that picture will change quite differently depending on the rainfall that had naturally been there or not that year, as well. And those things also change that outcome. So you have to be really careful that you just don't present hardware. God, look at the irrigation spread. Anyway, so I just think and that neutrality over that, which I'm sure you guys are absolutely great at, but please add value to the community.
Yes, my understanding is that this could actually be really useful and genuinely useful for people working in industries and businesses and the environment in order to make those linkages, those not just correlations, but working out how certain changes and whether that's land use change has caused other environmental change. And that is genuinely useful. And there, I guess my starting point is not the ratepayer, but the benefits for the environment and the long-term benefits for the environment if we understand how land use change, for example, can affect the environment, whether that might be improved environmental outcomes for things that are worse. So it seems to me that is could be a very, very useful thing. Gretchen, you wish to speak?
You can go first if you want.
All right. Yeah, it would certainly be good. Those who haven't had a chance to express an opinion, we will get round to all of you, and we will start with Tim. Thanks, Gretchen.
Yep, I think I'm there. Look, the things I like about this is can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes, good, thanks.
Yep. Just the modest level of resource that you mentioned in preparing this option 2, and also the use of the land and water plan modelling, which has cost a fortune over the years. And it would certainly be good to see something coming out of that. But it seems that as opposed to, you've got option 1 and option 2. Option 2 seems to be giving us, from what I'm picking up from you, Ben and Jason, is a sort of a more robust approach to seeing what's happened to the degradation of the environment. So it seems pretty good. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, Gretchen, your turn.
I can't speak highly enough about this idea. I've been a councillor for nearly 21 years, and this is what I've been asking for the entire time. It is unbelievably powerful and good. We have tried to do full state of the environment reports. I remember actually doing one before that was well, it's not similar to this, but it did try to bring in economics and land other factors. So we just haven't been able to do that enough. It's good to collect state of the environment data and data that tells us what, but it doesn't analyse the why or the where we're going. And sometimes I think people, I agree with what Kate was saying around it's not a celebration of 25 years of science, and I know you guys don't mean that either. It's 25 years of science adding value for our region, and whichever political spectrum you're on, I think it's really, really important, this data. For example, I guess, people often think of state of the environment, and they do think of land use change and what it's done to elevate nitrogen. And there's quite a negative thing there straight away. We've got something that's not brilliant that's going on. But actually, there's a whole lot of opportunity as well that you can find through doing analysis like this as well. What is fantastic about Otago that can be put in there as well? Where are those opportunities? Eyes wide open, what is happening with climate? One time our council also thought of, actually, what is going to happen for climate change in Otago? There are some actually quite interesting things that could be happening in new areas in our region, and knowing about those proactively is important. Also, where are the opportunities still for development that make sense, that really are going to add value for our region. Then also the proactive stuff that we can do, like what you said on how do we best target our resources efficiently and effectively. Okay, we've got your example was just one, but we've got a whole heap of harvesting that's going to be going on in this period, but we're not going to have so much in this period. How do we target our resources towards that? So it can actually add to a whole lot more efficient tools for managing our workload and how we're more effective as well. Another thing we were talking about recently was mural forum type stuff, and how we as a region put our best foot forward in an environment where we're looking at regional economic development, regional deals, regional development funding, etc. Actually, we do need to have these types of facts. We do need to merge them in as well more regionally and with economic development units, so that we can say, hey, this is our region, it offers a whole lot of value, this is what's happening, and we're open for business as well. So it's not just about the protecting and improving, it's a whole range of things that it can do. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, the slide you've got on page 17, which shows sort of moving from the state of the environment to those linking analyses, seems to be really central and relevant to this discussion. Yeah, that one there. Hey, so look, Gary, Andrew, Lloyd and Kevin, in no particular order, would be good to hear your thoughts. Lloyd, you got in first.
Oh, I didn't really jump together. I just trying to get it around in my head while we're actually doing here. Are we correct? So you're basically getting all the sites and putting it together in one place. Which is option one really, isn't it? So I'm trying to work out what the difference between option one and option two is. Option one, you just put it all in one place. This one is where you take bits out of everything.
Kind of. So option one is taking all the existing reports, taking the conclusions from those and putting them in one place. Option two is some of those newer programs like Land and Soil that came online, give or take, in 2020-ish. Those don't have retroactive land use maps. They don't have retroactive farm practice and things like that. So it's gap filling back in time to try and create those time series that enable us to reinterpret other domains information like water quality or biodiversity to provide more of a holistic picture. So if we do option one, you're going to get statements like, you know, X river is improving or degrading. We can't necessarily say why. If you do option two, that's where you start to get that practice change in this catchment or land use change is contributing to that trend in this way.
So, yeah, so that's my next sort of area of query. So what scale do you do it at? So this is, like you pull it all into one. If you just had it all into one all of Otago, it would seem to me may become meaningless because it's just got pretty much it's too much give and take here and there, even just in those what we call it, the heat going up, like there's quite a big difference, you know, across even Otago, which surprised me, you know. Or do you do it like based on FMUs, or will you do it based on a specific, I don't know if it's an area of interest or an outcome of interest, I guess, that you just do like studying stuff, yeah.
Yeah, no answer to that. That's the hope for feedback. So I guess there's kind of an optimal way of doing that, which is what communities and you guys want to see. And then there's some form of data limitation that factors into that at some stage about what scale can we talk about this confidently. That's trying to marry those up as much as we can.
So that last slide, the one on the land and water slide, is that really similar to what Cawthorn Institute's been doing as well around water quality stuff? They got very similar looking slides. Kate might be about there, you know, the Cawthorn Institute slides on green water management, yeah, fish, right?
The catchment.
Yeah, well, you know, the catchment,
Yeah.
when they get the Cawthorn Institute's been doing those like
Yeah,
educational type slides of we health and country got to there.
Probably. So probably, I know the ones you mean, they probably would be similar. Those are a bit more generic in that they talk to the, you know, the relationships we understand at a national level. What the team are talking about here is actually defining some of those relationships in context of a place in Otago. So, and I think when Jason was talking about, I asked Jason a question actually. If you think about a couple of catchments in Otago and their kind of size and your estimate of what might be an appropriate scale to analyse. So for instance, I estimate that you'd probably be okay to analyse the Waitara catchment for sure. But would you be able to go down to sort of shag level or that kind of stuff, just to give the table a bit of an impression?
Yeah, so it's a matter of a combo of monitoring sites that we have existing and then satellite resolution effectively. So Tari catchment, not a problem. Kloof as a whole, not a problem. Pomahaka, not going to be a problem. As you start to go into your Kakanuis, yep, shouldn't be a problem, but starting to get a bit small. And as you start to go below that in size, you start either having to group into areas or having to be very careful about what sort of resolution went into it. So in some places you'll have the photos to do it, and in some you won't.
FMU level is probably what I was thinking, sorry.
So,
Yeah, that makes sense.
what sort of, like, shall we go to Pomahaka level, because obviously I know the Pomahaka, are we talking like, you're gonna bring all this information, is it gonna be like a book, or is it gonna be a 3-page?
So what will come out of this is you can think of it a few different ways. But on the left-hand side of this slide is the sort of technical type report that you're going to have. If you stack those on top of each other, you're going to have a book. But as you go towards the right, that's where you're starting to get into your glossy well communicated in terms of not technical type documents that give readable conclusions. And then we could look at more digital ways of communicating this stuff where you can zoom in, zoom out, drag around. So the answer is both. You'll have a covering report that's more understandable, and you'll have reams of technical stuff that underpin that for those that do want to get into that technical underpinning.
Yeah, I think we need to just think about that too, because science is really useful, but it's not of any use if nobody sees it. So make it like really visible. So, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
And that's one of the problems we got right now. You've got a whole lot of science everywhere, but nobody can comprehend it all as one, like for an area. So this could bring it all together, but you got to be careful that it's not overpowering as well. And what sort of, how big a project is this?
Not hugely big. So you've got a couple of work streams like the land one where we're trying to retroactively create land use maps back through satellite and then do some estimates of practice change on farm. Those are kind of the big pieces, whereas the rest of it is largely there. And then it's just reanalyzing the blinking stuff. So it's not a huge amount of work. It can largely fit within work programs.
Is it like one or two people or one person or a part of a person?
Hard to know in terms of like FT hours, because it straddles everybody's expertise. So the whole team will play a role in the project.
I think if it's done right, it would be really awesome. And because it's if you need something to inform you, Andrew's catchment contents and challenges and stuff like this is exactly what. This is where he brings all that information into one to make it understandable by the communities that you're wanting, to allow a community to make a informed decision as to where it's at and where it's headed, if that makes sense. So I really do appreciate it, but I just yeah, I like the science reports, but this is like a report of reports. So I'm just trying to, it takes a wee bit to get the head around.
It won't be one big report with everything, and then you'll use it however you want. So you could quite easily cut out of that the tyro, and you've got that, or you could cut out a land use one, and then you might do a video where one of you guys speaks to community about nitrogen impacts on whatever. You'd use it however you wanted to once you've got it. Yeah, it'd be real simple to cut it down and make it into all sorts of different formats.
Yeah, I think the whole point of this exercise is designing a bit of that up front and acknowledging that we're going to have to communicate this stuff a number of different ways, and that there'll be plenty of parties who want to get right into the technical and behind and look under the hood, and we've got to be accountable for that. But at the same time, our main accountability is getting the correct messages in an applied way across to anyone in the community who might be interested, and so that's going to mean some technical documents, some light technical documents, and some light touch community comm stuff as well. So a fair range of things, and we'll have to plan that out and deliver it over time.
Now, we'll need a little bit of time just to hear back from Ben and Jason about where they'll take this next, but in the meantime, we've got Andrew.
It seems to me this is another piece of the puzzle that we've been looking for a while as we move forward to try and hit the right spots for environmental improvement. So marvellous. A couple of comments economic analysis. I think I'm not encouraging us to spend more money, but I feel that the knowledge around why land use is changing would be useful to understand, because if you look at those maps of yours, Jason, clearly there's been decisions made on the ground around how can I make my piece of land operate efficiently, effectively, get good value of money out of it, pay my mortgage, et cetera, et cetera. So I think understanding why those things have changed, and forestry is a classic example, ETS makes all the difference. So I think it'd be useful. And the urban environment, I think once again, if we're able to have the case studies, layman terms, we've got groups that are active in these spaces now, just like in the rural communities. So I think that would be incredibly valuable as well. And I can't remember what else was on the list, but it's all really useful, and I think it's a step in the right direction. And it's going to be valuable going forward. I can see that. Yeah, so thank you for the presentation. Really good.
Thanks, Andrew. Gary.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I'm sorry, I missed some of the earlier slides. Took me a little bit longer to get home than I thought. I'm struggling, to be honest. I'm struggling to see where this is going to get us to and what advantage it's going to be. My fear is it's going to be like what we saw yesterday with the storage report, where it's too vague. It's the methodology wasn't right. And it ends up with some numbers and some outcomes that are, well, I mean, the community would immediately challenge them, and a lot more detail is needed for them to be factual. But, you know, there was a message that they could be used for potential resource into the future. So what really worries me about this is that the sort of summary slides, or the ones that give us some direction, always have an undertone of we've arrived at a negative place and we are needing to rectify something. And it's not really a celebration of where Otago's evolved to from a scientific and land use and economic perspective or environmental perspective. It becomes a summary of what needs to be fixed. And I look at from the 25-year example, when you've honed in on Hawea, and basically what was Jim Cooper buying that property off Russell Emerson, 5,000 merinos has become about 4 dairy farms, and because they've utilised water out of the Clutha, and there had always been the encouragement to utilise water out of the Clutha, to me that was a good outcome of an economic uplift for the country. And so, yeah, you know, I really think this needs to be either way more detailed, with a lot more resource, but I don't see how it'll be useful for us. So sorry, that's possibly a bit different to everyone else, but that's just how I see it.
Thanks, Gary. There's some things in there that I'm sure the team will take on and listen to. Kevin, do you have some comment on this?
Yep. I probably can't understand why it wasn't done 21 years ago when you thought of it, Rich. And so it's, yeah, and the key to it will be the form that it finally ends up in being. Look, and my biggest environmental worry at the moment for the whole of Otago is this expansion of population in the Queenstown area, and that is not mentioned enough in here. We listened to Ioane at lunchtime today when there's developments of 3,000 sections and 400 sections and 800 sections, and none of this relates to, I know we've got the word urban development, but none of the impact of those people on our, which is the jewel in our crown that Council Laws often talks about. I think we're really, really, really light on that thrust, because although my diligence just went on me and I wanted to quote a page that you've got on here. Sorry.
It's page 22.
Yeah, it's coming back to me. So that's a real concern that I have. I think that's our biggest. And then when we look at the, again, I think the concept that will be the finishing product. So then if we have a look at the, coming back to me, at the picture you've got on the Waitaki Plains, on North Otago, and it shows the N loss one on there.
Page 22.
Yeah. Mine just isn't coming back up, sorry. Right. So yeah, it's a really interesting one then, because you see GMP plus, and I'll be really interested to know what that means, because I didn't read back, and then current, because I think your current is actually already, and I'm just wondering if we're up to date enough with what's actually happening in the market. And so that's what we're saying is current, but I think we've actually advanced far past current. So you'd want to know where that actually is. And then when you look at the N losses on that map, where you've still got a whole heap, you go to GMP plus and your Waitaki Plains on an alluvial plains, you're not going to be losing any N yet. In our heavy soil stuff, you're still going to be losing N on GMP plus. I think that's probably scientifically wrong. I can be challenged on that, but you're more like the same amount of nitrogen going into alluvial plains, it's more likely to lose than you will on our heavy soils. So I just wonder where that's
probably getting into too much detail of what we're talking. So I'm just saying, yeah, look, it will be, we haven't really articulated what our goal is for it to use it as. And if it is around de-siloing our organisation, so science, environmental implementation and planning and regulatory all function under one, with one Bible beside it, I think that's tremendous. But unless we're going to take it to do the whole lot in one hit, it's a bit piecemeal. But if that's your direction, I'll be 100% behind it.
Look, thanks, Stephen. Look, we will wind up now. I guess my two final questions for Ben and Jason: have you received the useful direction, sufficient direction from us? And two, what are you going to do next?
Thank you. It's been a really good discussion. Some really good points. So just to follow up a couple of comments, I think the power of it will be in the data set, not the product. It won't just sit on a shelf. Someone can come along with a question such as, how is increasing forestry in a catchment affected water yield, for example, and you can run that analysis within a few minutes and have an answer for different catchments across Otago. So it can be reused multiple times into the future, depending on what the question of the day was. So it's the sort of picture is that the live data set that we could analyze as needed rather than a brochure or a publication.
Not a book.
Yeah. So that's sort of how I would envision it.
Yeah, look, that's okay. Thank you. We don't need to get into that.
Yep.
Oh no, but just for
discussion on
that,
issue.
but what the point I was trying to make, sorry, Alan, is that's really, really good, and I understand that's where you're heading. But unless we're using that across the whole organisation, it's pointless just having the science part using it.
Yeah, and look, having received direction, including some concerns from some councillors, how will you take that on your next actions, and how will we hear what will be the next things we hear from you around this?
We'll go back and have a sort of digest the feedback we've had today, and I can move a plan forward and likely keep council up to date with what we're up to.
Likely.
Sorry.
Well,
Have you got anything to add, Tom?
yeah, that's what it was that we will get council up to date. And yes, I expect that we should be back early in the new triennium with a progress report, and give you a bit of an understanding of how we've taken on board your feedback, and because it's very early days, so as we start to shape things up, we'll be able to tell a story that I think addresses some of those concerns.
Thank you very much. Look, thank you very much for bringing that paper. Thank you everyone for taking part in the discussion. It has been really, really interesting and enlightening. So we'll close this one up now, and we will, or most of us will be back here at 3:30 for another workshop. Thanks a lot.